New NATO Secretary General goes to Ukraine. The meeting was not a disaster, but it was not good either. Through a Crimean government representative and reserve Major General Leonid Ivlev, Russia has sent a fresh warning to the new NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, asserting that Russia has its own national interests, which both Hitler and Napoleon disregarded, ultimately leading to their defeat. Mr. Ivlev stated that Secretary General Rutte was following the same path with NATO at the request of the United States, and he risked the same defeats that befell others who challenged Russia's interests. On his first trip as Secretary General, Mr. Rutte appropriately ignored this warning and traveled to Kyiv to meet with Ukrainian officials. Air raid sirens greeted Secretary Rutte upon his arrival to Kyiv on Thursday, October 3rd, for his meeting with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, though they did not appear to interfere with the meetings. Secretary Rutte stated that part of his mission as Secretary General was to shore up Western support for Ukraine while it was fighting its war with Russia, and that NATO would commit $44.1 billion in military aid to Ukraine in 2025. President Zelensky presented the Ukraine Victory Plan to Mr. Rutte ahead of the October 12th meeting in Ramstein, Germany, when the plan is to be presented to 50 countries according to the released agenda. The other item pertains to Ukraine's request for additional weapons from the West and the lifting of all weapons-related restrictions, both of which seem to be integral parts of the Ukraine Victory Plan. President Zelensky apparently added another one of these talking points, and that is he views the U.S. response against Iran to protect Israel against Iranian missiles, while Iran sends missiles to Russia with no restrictions for their use against Ukraine, as a duplicative policy against Ukraine. This appears to be Ukraine's message ahead of the Ramstein meeting. Secretary Rutte did not agree to the idea of NATO becoming involved in shooting down Russian missiles or drones over Ukraine, but he did not deny it either. Mr. Rutte, correctly in a legal sense, said that the decision to shoot down missiles was a national decision for each country and not a NATO decision. This is a peculiar stance for a continent dominated by NATO and European Union, which both prioritize collective decision-making on most policies, while deferring a decision as consequential as shooting down missiles to the individual countries. This appears to be a tacit support for Mr. Rutte for the idea, but he also knows that he could not get unanimous support from NATO countries for such a policy. The issue with this tactic is that if Russia attacks the air defense sites within NATO countries that have involved themselves in the war, it would create an Article 5 response. This could potentially ensnare NATO in the conflict or breach its collective defense pledges if other NATO countries decline to assist the targeted countries. Not taking a strong position over the demand from Ukraine is a dangerous and destabilizing choice by Secretary Rutte. Regarding the Ukraine Victory Plan, Mr. Rutte publicly supported Ukraine's rights to use all Western-donated weapons to strike targets deep in Russia as it deems fit. He asserted that Ukraine's right to self-defense extends beyond the border, and Russia's illegal war justifies Ukraine's use of donated weapons against targets within Russia. From a simplistic perspective of the war's politics, both Ukraine and Mr. Rutte's argument, grounded in basic fairness or biblical eye for an eye philosophy, is valid and supports both Ukraine and Mr. Rutte's viewpoint. The problem lies in the complexity of these arguments when viewed through the prism of realpolitik or considering all the variables involved in a conflict as large as the one in Ukraine. Attacks on Russia could lead to a loss of morale to support the war, and Russians' capabilities could be degraded, which could save Ukrainian lives or cost Russia more lives on the battlefield. However, it is an escalation that could lead NATO closer to war with a nuclear-armed Russia if the casualties inflicted on Russia push the Russian leadership to escalate or expand the war. It could speed up peace talks as the cost of the war increases on the Russians, or it could backfire and lead Russia to a decision to decide to take by force whatever is necessary and forego any peace talks. The use of weapons may prolong the war by jeopardizing peace talks. Germany is one of the leading countries pushing for a negotiated end to the war. The U.S. and Germany are also unwilling to risk an escalation with Russia by allowing deep attacks into Russia using their weapons. France, once a country willing to push the Russian red lines, is backing off now that domestic political issues have weakened French President Macron's ability to press for a war escalation. The use of long-range weapons on Russia, though morally right, if you can call the war's decisions moral, is risky as it would just easily backfire on the objectives and eventually prolong the war. The question of Ukraine joining NATO was also a topic discussion, as the new Secretary General is an avid supporter of Ukraine joining the alliance. Mr. Rutte stated that the decision was, quote, irreversible, end quote, and as NATO countries sign bilateral agreements with Ukraine to provide aid, they are laying the groundwork for Ukraine to join NATO. Secretary Rutte's position is also problematic. NATO membership for Ukraine will definitely be a point of contention for any peace talks and will most likely be a deal breaker for any forward to find a way to negotiate the end of the war. NATO rules also state that a country at war or in a territorial dispute cannot be part of NATO either. Finally, democratic processes have to be respected, and Ukraine, as a wartime measure, has suspended habeas corpus and elections, including the fact that President Zelensky's term has already ended. The U.S., Germany, Hungary, and other members of the 32-nation alliance publicly oppose Ukraine's admission to NATO. Secretary Rutte lacked authority to discuss Ukraine's NATO membership, given his knowledge of the organization's rules prohibiting membership extensions. He is also making statements that are likely to complicate the start of peace talks, as Ukraine's NATO membership could potentially hinder negotiations with Russia. While offering NATO membership as a peace talk topic would be legitimate, it should not occur while the country is still at war. The open question of defending airspace over Ukraine is a national decision that appears to pose significant risk to the alliance. At best, it could hinder peace, and at worst, it could escalate towards a war with Russia. Mr. Rutte's calls to allow free use of weapons are also a risky decision, and he was unwise to advocate on the public stage in direct contradiction to the largest NATO member, the United States, and the richest country in the European Union, Germany. The idea that Secretary General Rutte could go to Ukraine and try to shame other NATO members to fully comply with Ukraine requests was ill-conceived. Especially as a seasoned politician, he should know better. We hope that Mark Rutte's mistakes stem from his new job and lack of experience in the position due to strategic implications of military decision-making that is part of the role.